Welcome to those of you at mochurch.tv. Those of you who are here, grab paperback Bibles. You can pass them down to your friends who are stuck in the middle of the rows and can't get to them themselves. Or bust open a Bible app. The Bible app is free to download, and we'll be using the New International Version as far as translations of the Bible go. For those of you online, if you live in the greater Cleveland area, we'd love to have you come hang out with us and meet the freaks in person and hang out with us, but to maybe meet some people who could encourage you as you try to journey forward spiritually. So every year or a couple times a year, we typically have some interns at Momentum who come to kind of look into ministry and decide whether this is something they want to go into as a full-time vocation, or is this something that's maybe part of their education if they're studying at a Christian college. And a couple years ago, we had a guy whose name is Caleb Beck, and Caleb Beck is a bearded wonder. He's really excited about that donut. And he's now a student minister working with middle schoolers, high schoolers in Alaska, at a church in Alaska. And so the beard is definitely essential now. But he spoke in our Pac-Man Fever series, the series that we're in now. It's a recurring series. We do it about every other year, sometimes a little bit more often. But he spoke in this series in 2016. And I'll never forget a story he told where it was just simply about him when he was an early teenager. And he went to his aunt and uncle's house, and he was playing the Nintendo Wii with his younger cousin, who was like 8 years old at the time. So he's early teens, cousin's 8, and he's playing ping pong with him on the Wii, and he's pretty much dominating his cousin. And he said the more they played, the more that he was winning, and it got to the point where every time he got a point, his cousin would just get more and more angry at him and at the Wii. And would just start screaming and yelling at the game. And so every time a point was scored, Caleb would score a point, and his cousin would yell out, "This game is stupid!" And then he'd score another point, and it would just be like, "Oh, come on!" And he'd just get madder and madder at the game and at Caleb. And it went on and on. Now, for those of you who are like, "Man, Caleb, don't break the kid's spirit. He's 8. You're a teenager." I kind of understand that mentality, but I've gamed online. And I've had my butt handed to me by some 8-year-olds that I didn't want to be matched up against. And they wrecked me in some shooter game. And I'm like, should you even be playing a shooter game, you little prepubescent? Get off online, you know. And so I've been wrecked by little kids. Like you sometimes it used to be back in the day with like Xbox 360. You didn't have to talk to people during the game. You could shut them off. But then in between the games, it would be like their voice would come on and they could talk trash if they just whipped you online. And you would be just shocked and terrified to find out at the end of games, I just got beat by an 11-year-old and a 10-year-old and 8-year-old, and me and my adult men friends lost to them. And so after the game, they'd be like, "I pound you, you fool." And you'd be like, "Oh my gosh, it's either a 4-year-old girl or a 10-year-old boy. I can't tell the difference." But either way, it's embarrassing. And so if you're like, "Caleb, no mercy," if you're like, have mercy on this kid, I'm like, no, I'm Cobra Kai mentality here. Strike first, strike hard, no mercy, sir. All right, so he eventually just keeps winning, scoring points on his cousin. And then finally, at the end of one of these games of ping pong and the Nintendo Wii, his cousin just goes ballistic, goes nuts, goes Tasmanian devil, hawk, smash, takes his controller, bam, just smashes it on the ground, runs up, turns off the TV, stomps out of the room, doesn't say a word to Caleb. And Caleb's like, "What just happened?" And this is what we're talking about today. What just happened for those of you who are gamers? He rage quit. Okay, this is the thing. It's something that gamers talk about amongst each other. Though they basically, someone just goes nuts. They just go like throw a tantrum like a gigantic diaper baby. And they just go nuts and they quit the game. Now, in our Pac-Man series, usually we'll cover a particular game as our topic that day, and we'll use it as a parable, like a story or an analogy that has a spiritual point. But every once in a while, we cover kind of a concept from gaming. That's really what we're doing this morning. We're talking about rage quitting, and rage quitting essentially is when a gamer gets so angry during a video game that he or she, they leave the game before it's over. All right, back in the day, it used to be like the kids on the playground. There'd be the one kid that brought the ball, and everybody can play ball because he's there with his ball. And this is the equivalent of saying, "I'm taking my ball and I'm going home." nobody's going to be able to play. Because in a lot of games, like the games that I picture, when someone goes hawk smash, when they go Tasmanian devil, and they throw a tantrum like a big, gigantic diaper baby, when you're playing in teams against each other, like some kind of shooter game, capture the flag, when one person rage quits and drops out, it ruins it for everyone. Because suddenly, you don't have 4v4 in Bed Wars. You don't have squads in, Fortnite. It's 4v3. And the whole game dynamic is ruined because one person threw a fit and they left the game and everyone is affected. And sometimes if they really go next level and rage quit breaking stuff, then they don't have the choice of joining back on because controllers in 72 pieces and they threw it through the monitor. And, it's like, okay, you're retired officially now until you go to GameStop again. And so that's the idea of rage quitting. Rage quitting happens for a few different reasons. Sometimes someone's angry at the game itself. You're playing a game and you're on Geometry Dash, for instance, and you can't get through a level. You're just stuck on this level. Or you're playing some Mario-based game and you can't get past this boss. Like, man, I just can't figure out how to get past this boss. But sometimes it's not the game. Sometimes it's technology. Sometimes it's, I got a bad Wi-Fi connection. I keep getting kicked off. Sometimes it's a laggy controller. Other times, though, and most often, it's people involved that you're mad at, okay? Sometimes it's a teammate that's not pulling their weight. Or if you're in a shooter game, they keep shooting you. And you're on their team, and you're like, get off me, dude, Like, we're trying to accomplish something as a team. Or they're playing like garbage, and you're mad about it. Sometimes it's opponents trash-talking you. And that's more hurtful when it's an 8-year-old girl online for me, okay? But eventually you just get tired of hearing the trash talk, and sometimes people just go ballistic, and they rage quit. Sometimes it's because someone's owning you. You're getting lapped in Mario Kart, Maybe you even get mad at yourself because you're not pulling your own weight. You're not playing as well as you usually do. There's different reasons people rage quit. I read online a few weeks ago when I was researching this, someone online was talking about in one type of scenario, the progression that happens in a rage quit. And he said it goes like this. Stage 1 is the provoking event. He says, Sally does something inexcusable to Joe, but typically only controversial to others, okay? Then stage 2 is the belly aching stage. Joe gets angry, can't understand why others aren't as angry as Joe is. He proceeds to grumble about it in order to evoke a certain action to be taken against Sally. For example, come on, guys, let's boot her, let's ban her, let's kick her out of the game. And either insufficient or no action is taken against Sally, thus prompting Joe to give even more of a crap. Stage 3, the ultimatum. Joe demands that action be taken against Sally or Joe will cease gaming forever, okay? Then stage 4 is the ellipsis stage. Ellipsis is the ... the pause. The ellipsis stage. Joe still doesn't get his way, and people are standing around waiting for Joe to either accept the compromise, back down, or make good on his threat to leave the game. Then stage 5, the rage quit. Joe won't give it a rest, and ironically ends up doing the very thing he wants Sally to do. He leaves the game. Now, sometimes games can be so frustrating. They really, really can. And that you want to quit. I've definitely wanted to quit many times. I probably, at some level of rage quit, I can't remember a time, but I'm sure at some time I rage quit. And so sometimes games or the people in those games make you so mad. You just want to throw a fit or break something or scream your head off. And I typically think of those scenarios, Halo or Destiny for me, or 4v4 squads in Fortnite, where when someone steps out, it ruins the whole game for everyone else. It affects the players around them. It affects the team, changes the whole game, and it ruins it for other people. Now, as a minister, as someone who just tries to help people grow spiritually, to move forward, to love God, love people, and to make disciples, students of Jesus who can make other disciples, man, I've seen people quit or rage quit on God or God's people, His church, many, many different times for many, many different reasons. And I'll be honest, some of them are legit. If I gave some of you the stage and you weren't freaked out by that, if I did that, which I'm not going to because I know some of you, you're not getting a microphone. And so if I did that, some of you would come up here and tell us stories that probably everyone in the room would agree with. Yep, I get it, dude. That sucks. Your church experience sucked. you knew a Christian who was a butthole. Let's just be honest. You knew some, like, we would agree with you, okay? But then other times, we're like, man, that you did quit. You did rage quit. But if you were to really be honest, there was kind of a lack of maturity. There was kind of a lack of, man, I could have stuck that out. Like somebody ticked me off or something happened. I know I could have stuck that out. And a lot of times, as tough as it is to hear, sometimes we rage quit because of immaturity. And we just quit too quickly. You know, a lot of times when people rage quit on God or on his people, the church, and again, I preface saying I get it. A lot of times it is legit. But other times it's because the way your teammates are playing. It's people around you who hack you off, make you mad. Someone at church ticked them off and they rage quit. Someone hurt them. Someone gossiped about them. Someone said something to them that was insensitive. And or worse yet, if you're a parent, they did that to your kid, right? Next level. Now all of a sudden the gloves are off and it's a full-on hockey fight. Like, all right, this is not cool. And so the bottom line is there was drama, as there is everywhere with imperfect human beings. It's hard not to find imperfect human beings. There's drama. And that person rage quit. And if that happened to you in the past, if someone hurt you, was insensitive to something you were going through, they gossiped about you, I just want to say sincerely, I am so sorry that happened. It does happen with imperfect people, and I know it does. And so maybe that's something that happened to you in the past, and that is a reason that people rage quit. I know some people who have quit on God or even on the church because, ironically, they were the ones who did something stupid. Like they did something that they ended up being so ashamed about or embarrassed about, or they did something stupid and blamed it on someone else. Like, well, the reason I did this thing is because she's a lunatic, you know, that kind of thing. Like, I did it, but it's that person's fault. And they rage quit on God and the church. I know some people who have lost someone they loved. And when they went through that tragedy, that was the thing that they directed their frustration, their anger, all that stuff. They directed it toward God or people not showing up, you know, to rally to them in their time of need for whatever reason. And they get mad at God or God's people and they rage quit. I talked to a teenage girl at a camp I was preaching at in upstate New York. There was a crew of us sitting around chatting, and we were able to have like this like really serious talk in the midst of this buzz and people chattering. And someone had told me there's this girl here whose dad, he was a doctor, and he died last year. And she loved her dad, and she's crushed. She just thinks her dad was the greatest person in the world. And I'm talking to this teenage girl, and she's just totally isolated. Like, you just always see her off by herself. And when I knew that, it just helped me kind of frame, like, this poor kid's over here constantly thinking about her dad being gone. And she told me, she was just like, man, I just don't understand why God would take my dad away from me. And she was pissed. And she's hurt. And I said, man, I'm not going to be able, she was kind of asking for my advice. And I said, I'm not going to be able to solve all this in a conversation. I just said, but I think a starting point for you might be, I think you have to start reframing God as not being the villain in the story who took your father away from you, but more being the heavenly Father that he describes himself as, who's crying with you, who's mourning with you. Like, I mean, and I told her a story about Jesus showing up to a funeral of a friend of his named Lazarus, and just said Jesus showed up and he wept. And he was about to perform a really cool miracle and raise Lazarus from the dead. I think he was weeping for the people who were mourning over Lazarus because of the impact of death in our world. And so I just said, man, I think you need to just start trying to work on reframing this, that God is weeping with you. And if that's something that is kind of hurt your relationship with God or people of God, then I just want to say again, man, I'm sorry that happened to you. I know those things are extremely difficult to handle. And so this rage quitting thing, funny enough, it goes back to the beginning of the church. I mean, first century, what we call the early church in the first century, basically what's written about in what we call the New Testament of the Bible, scriptures that are from the time of Jesus, his life and teaching, on afterward into the early church. This has been going on forever. The first person that comes to mind, if you know any characters from the history of the church, is this guy named Judas Iscariot, who was a disciple of Jesus. He was one of the 12. Like, he was one of the main guys Jesus poured into. And it seems that for selfishness and for a profit, he turns his back on Jesus and is no longer a disciple of Jesus. He quits on him. Actually, we're going to cover Judas more next month because we're doing a series leading up to and on Easter called The Bad Boys of Easter, and we're going to be talking about Judas one of those Sundays. But the 12 disciples of Jesus, they weren't the only disciples of Jesus. I mean, if you look carefully in Scripture, there are many, those are just the main ones he poured into, but there are many other disciples of Jesus constantly around him during his life and teachings. And there's men disciples, there's women disciples very clearly. And so there's all these different disciples. And Jesus told a lot of parables, which were stories with a spiritual point. And one of Jesus' parables said this, check this out. Jesus said that there's someone, he's talking about people who hear the story of the good news of Jesus, like, I'm God in the flesh, come in the world to show you how much you matter to God. Like, God's pursuing you. And Jesus describes someone who hears the word, the message of Jesus, and at once receives it with joy. Like, they get excited about this. Like, really, my Creator has been pursuing me, and I'm seeing signs of that? Yes, I receive that with joy. But since they have no root, meaning they don't dig in and try to start to build a relationship with Jesus, they last only a short time. And it goes on to say, when trouble, Jesus says, or persecution comes because of the word, because of the message of Jesus, they quickly fall away. So meaning some people become followers of Jesus. Yes, I want to be a Christian, I want to be a disciple, but very quickly, because they don't dig in and work on their own relationship with God, they rely on other people to kind of feed them, lead them. They don't dig in and they have no root, so they last only a short time and they quit. They chuck the control on the ground eventually. Like, why am I not growing? Why am I not doing better? Why are things not changing? Why is this not? And they quit. You know, Paul, who was a first century Christian leader, he wrote a lot of the tiny books in the New Testament. And really, they're just letters from him to individuals or him to churches in the first century. And he's trying to give them instructions. Like, here's what it looks like to follow Jesus. Here's what it looks like to love God and love others and make disciples who make disciples. And he brings up people a few times in the New Testament. He drops names of people who are like, man, I had this guy. He was traveling with me. We were going around starting churches, but this guy's disappeared. He no longer is a disciple of Jesus. There's guys like Hymenaeus and Alexander and Demas who are mentioned in the New Testament where he says things like they shipwrecked their faith, meaning they had faith, but it was shipwrecked. Or they decided there were just things in the world they loved more, and they walked away from God. They quit on God. One time, Paul writes this. He says, some people eager for money have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. So he's like, some people quit faith because they're chasing paper. Bottom line, like, God becomes less of a priority than money, and that's just what they're chasing after. And then there's this really crazy chapter, John chapter 6 in the Bible, that John is one of the books about the life and teachings of Jesus. And we get through John chapter 6, and there's these hard teachings that Jesus is sharing. They're kind of hard to understand. For me, like reading this chapter, I'm like, man, some of these are so different and unique and tough to grasp. And after hearing these difficult teachings, it says, many of his disciples, okay, these are disciples of Jesus, many said, Jesus, this is a hard teaching. Who can accept it? And then the next verse, verse 66 says this, from this time, many of Jesus' disciples turned back and no longer followed him. Like there's like a mass exodus moment in John chapter 6 where a bunch of disciples turn and they're like, dude, it's getting weird, man. Like the things you're asking us are calling for more sacrifice, more obedience, because following and obeying God always costs something. And they're like, you know what? I think we're out, man. I think we're out. And they do the slow walk away. Like, I mean, we can still be cool and everything if we like see in the marketplace, something like that, but we're out. And they turn and they walk away. And Jesus actually looks at the other 12, the main 12, and he says, are you going with them? And the 12 look at him and they say, I love their response. They say, where else would we go? Like, you alone hold the eternal words of life. Like, where else are we going to learn about faith in God the way that you're teaching us? But a bunch of disciples walk away at that moment. It's a really dark, tragic verse, and what's interesting is the way to remember it real easy is it's John 6:6, which is kind of interesting. And so, dark verse where all these people walk away. So there's a lot of reasons that people throw their controller down on the ground and they walk away, they give up on God. So one thing, I want to give you one main piece of teaching today just to kind of help frame this, just to kind of say, all right, this might change my mindset, my expectations for walking forward in my relationship with God. If I'm already someone who I follow God, I'm committed to letting Jesus be the leader of my life and not lead it on my own and mess it up on my own. Or if you're someone who's like, I'm kind of checking out the Jesus thing, I don't really know if I want to follow Jesus, this is a great thing to kind of help you get your mindset, your expectations in place. So I have a friend whose name is Stan Munson. I talked about him 2 weeks ago. My commitment is to talk about him every other week till Christmas. But his name's Stan Munson. He used to be a part of Momentum, one of the volunteers who helped us start Momentum. But he and his family have since moved back to Washington, D.C., where we had actually moved here from with them. And so anyways, he's a great dude, really brilliant guy. He thinks in different ways. And I love that because he's always looking at things from a different angle than me. I'm like, man, like, Stan, if you're online, you're a weird dude. You think strangely, and I love that about you, but you're weird. And so if you don't know Stan, you can't picture him, he's kind of like a middle-aged Harry Potter. That does it for you. Is it true, Stan? I know it is. Okay, so you just picture that. So anyways, whenever someone came to him, he was a piano instructor, and whenever someone came to him and was like, I think I'd like to pay you to teach me piano, he would have this kind of thing he would talk through with them. He'd give them some life lessons on relationships to kind of evaluate, are you ready to be my piano student? And so he'd talk to them and he'd say, all right, one thing I want you to do is I want you to decide some things about relationships and understand that there are two different styles of relationship. One is a long-term style relationship and one's a short-term style relationship. And he says, whether it's a friendship, whether it's a marriage, whether it's your faith, whether it's a calling or a career, like you have different types of relationships that you choose to have with those people or those things. And he says, so I want to ask you, what kind of relationship do you want? And here's the difference. He said, a short-term style relationship, it has 2 ingredients in it. But a long-term style relationship has 3 ingredients in it. He says, and I would tell parents of kids who were coming to be my students, and I would tell adult piano students this. I would say to them, in this sober moment, before you make the decision to be my piano student, in the sober moment right now, I want you to ask, do I want to have a short-term style relationship or a long-term style relationship with the piano? I want you to just think about how you want to engage with the piano. Now, he said the difference is kind of like this. Picture your grandma goes to Disney World or did go to Disney World, maybe even before you were born. But for whatever, she has a souvenir and she gives you a pencil, from Disney World. And so an example could be that if that pencil breaks, you might say, well, that was cool. I got this pencil. I had this pencil from my grandmother, and it was from Disney World. It was from Florida. Like, this is cool. But it broke. It's not a big deal, and you throw it away. Then that's a short-term style relationship, very simply. But if you got this pencil from your grandmother, and she gave it to you on your birthday, and she has since passed away, you might say, man, this pencil, kind of a big deal. It means more to me. And you might say, I'm going to get some Scotch tape, and I'm going to wrap this thing. I'm going to try to get it back pieced together perfectly, put some Scotch tape. Then I'm going to put it up on my shelf, and I'm going to do what I can to put it somewhere where it doesn't break again. That's kind of an example of a long-term style relationship. And so Stan Munson would say this. A short-term style relationship, the 2 ingredients are this. And this is similar to something we talked about 2 weeks ago also. It has peaks and plateaus. That's a short-term style relationship. So you love it, it's great, but after a while, it's just a pencil, okay? And so a long-term relationship has 3 ingredients, and that is, of course, peaks, plateaus, and valleys. And that added ingredient of valleys is what makes something a long-term style relationship. So Stan would tell his students, here's the deal. You're going to love learning piano. You're going to love it. There's going to be times where you're just going to be like, I'm so excited about this. Dang, my fingers are dancing like Liberace up in here. That sounds really cool. I made a stride forward. This is really, really cool. You're going to be excited. Then there's other times you're going to feel like you're going through the motions. I'm just kind of doing it right now. I'm not real excited about it, but I am doing it. And that's kind of a plateau. I'm just going through the motions. But then there's going to be other times where you're going to freaking hate the piano, okay? You're going to hate it. You're going to hate the homework I'm giving you to go practice, the scales that I'm telling you. You're going to hate it, and that's going to be the valley. And so right now, what I want you to do is I want you to decide in this sober moment, you have to decide which of those two relationships you want to have with the piano. You want a long-term style relationship, and if you do, here's the deal. Expect valleys. Expect to hit the wall. Expect valleys, because that's where people quit. That's where people get frustrated at themselves, at someone else, and they rage quit on the thing. They say, I just can't do it. Mom, I don't want to go to practice. I hate the piano. I can't do it. I've been trying to do it. And they diaper baby out. They freak out, and they say, I'm done with it. I'm not going. I don't care. I will puke on this carpet. I'll throw a fit. I'll get mad. I'll break things. I'll exorcist. I'll spin my head around, puke pea soup. I'll go nuts, man. And so they just freak out. And he's like, that's where it's during those valleys. He goes, but when you get to valleys, here's what should happen. You should not say something's wrong. You should say something's right. This is a good sign that I'm in a long-term style relationship. I mean, it's the same way in dating. It's the same way in marriage. Like, hey, we're in a valley. That means we're like journeying together for a while here. Like, this is a long-term style thing. We made it past the honeymoon or the warm fuzzies, the goosebumps. So Stan would tell his adult parents, he'd just say to them, you're going to have a real opportunity to parent through this. If you have a kid who's coming to me for piano, you're going to get to teach them, hey, we committed to a long-term style relationship with a piano, and I know you're not feeling it now, but that's why you got to push through right now. He said, and those lessons are going to be microcosm lessons for one day when they're married, and the marriage is difficult to say, I know, but we've committed to this long-term. We promised till death do us part, so we're going to go through the valleys and not think that other people who love each other don't go through these. We're going to say that's part of the long-term style relationship process. And finally, Stan would just look at his prospective disciple and he'd say, so clarify for me, which of the two relationships are you looking for with the piano? And if they would say, I think I want a short-term style relationship. I don't know if it's piano for me. I'm going to try out piano, but I might switch over to saxophone because chicks dig the saxophone, you know? Like I might switch to something else. Then he would say, then I just think I'm not the piano teacher for you. It's not that I don't like you. It's not that I don't love you. I can just only have a limited amount of students, and I just want to have students who are saying, I'm going into this dedicated to a long-term style relationship with the piano. So I just want to ask you the clear analogy that's coming up I-77 right now. Just very simply, like when you think about having a relationship with God, what do you think about? What type of relationship would you want to have with God? It's really a question about your spirit and your desire. What kind of relationship do you want to have with God? Do you want it to be long-term style or short-term style? Like, do you want it to be for the long-term, for life, a faith thing that I'm going to do for life? And what about your church? You know, say, okay, yep, find a church and say, I'm going to decide which church it's going to be. That's all on you. That's all up to you. But when you decide, I'm going to lean into a relationship with this church, do you want a short-term style relationship or a long-term style relationship? I think it's the same thing about your potential spouse, you know, or the spouse that you have now. What kind of relationship did you say you wanted or you say you want? But here's the deal. Valleys are going to come with any of that stuff. With God, you're going to go through some valleys, and they shouldn't be a shock. They shouldn't be a surprise. You're going to go through it. And I am telling you, with people who are imperfect, the people of God, the forgiven people of God, they're forgiven. They're not perfect. The people of God, you're going to go through some valleys and some drama and some hurt and some pain. And so it's really important that before that, in a sober moment, you decided, what did I commit to? Did I say I was just going to try this out and I can bail out whenever I want to? Yeah, I said it was going to be short term. I'm going to try it out. Or did you ever come to a point where you said, I want this to be for life? I want this to be a long-term style relationship with God and with his people, with his church. I'm in it. This is my church family, for instance. I'm sticking to it. This is why in Scripture, godly teachers in Scripture constantly are teaching about certain words that all kind of lump together. And those words are things like faithfulness. They're words like endurance, like endure till the end. They're words like obedience and perseverance. There's analogies like when you run the race of faith, it's a marathon. So run with perseverance. Like it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. Man, you are going to hit a wall running and just know that the wall is coming. So run with perseverance or stand firm. Jesus even taught his disciples, remain in me. Like stay connected to me because I'm the only one that gives true life. And if you want true life, you have to stay connected to me. And if you're connected to me, you'll bear fruit in your life. So remain in me. And there's even times where Jesus says compassionately, man, if you're beat up, come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. And it's like Jesus is saying, man, if you're hurting, if you're tired, if you're beat up, don't run away from me. Don't rage quit. Don't look at me like I'm the one that wants to see you being beat up by life. Come to me. Run to me, and I'll give you rest. And that's perseverance. And perseverance is a matter of character. It's a virtue. It's a virtue to persevere through the valleys when things get difficult, when it's no longer warm, fuzzy, when it's no longer exciting for a few moments or a season. And it's a godly trait, and it's a fruit that if you work together with God, that God will produce this fruit in your life of faithfulness and perseverance. Because who doesn't want to quit sometime? Man, I do. I mean, and most of the major things in my life, there's times where I want to quit. Just like, man, this is so much work. Doing this costs me something. I'd like to quit it. Everybody wants to quit at some point. And so it helps to say in a sober moment, what kind of relationship am I or am I not committing to? Jesus said it this way. It's kind of like Stan Munson was his piano student. Jesus stood before potential disciples and he said, what I want you to do is count the cost. Like before you come follow me, I'm not trying to trick you into follow me. Before you follow me, count the cost. Kind of budget up in your mind. Am I willing to obey Jesus when I don't want to? Am I willing to say the Creator is smarter than me? Am I willing? And if so, count the cost first. But when you're in, don't look back. He says, put your hand to the plow and never look back. Like, don't look back. Don't second guess it all the time, or you're just going to be super wishy-washy, in and out. Am I willing to pay the price to follow God and to receive the rewards of God in this life and after because I'm following Him? A couple suggestions I'd give are this. Just do a Google search on some scriptures in the Bible that are about God's faithfulness to us. I mean, really, this is where it starts. How do we learn to be faithful? How do we learn to persevere? We see that from God, and we're like, dang, He doesn't give up on me. Like Romans chapter 8, there's this cool poetic passage about how nothing you could ever do will make God love you any less. You can try to impress Him with some cool stuff, and He's like, yep, I already love you to the max. There's no way I can love you more. You do some really stupid stuff. He's like, I know. You did some really stupid stuff. That was really harmful, what you did. It hurt others, it hurt yourself. But I don't love you any less because you did that stuff. My love for you doesn't change. I'm faithful in my love to you. You go to Luke chapter 15. You see that God's faithfulness is that He will always pursue you. No matter how much you give Him the finger, walk the other direction, no matter what you do, God's like, I'm still chasing you. Still chasing you. I'm doing everything I can. I'm just going to keep dropping hints. I'm going to keep putting people in your life. I'm going to keep doing things, creating circumstances, letting you hear little things that make you think about me. I'm going to pursue you. I'm faithful. It doesn't matter what you've done. I'm going to faithfully pursue you. And you see that from God, and that is really the ultimate and only way to say, I'm really learning what true faithfulness and perseverance is. I mean, that's just the way it goes. Pray then also, you learn it from God, and you also can learn it in an imperfect way from people. We talk about love God, love people, but ultimately also God and people are examples of a lot of things. And so you look at people and you say, man, God, teach me some lessons about faithfulness by the people around me. Like, put some people in my life and let me see a godly marriage. I don't even know what that looks like. What's a godly marriage look like? Does it mean women wear dresses all the way down to their ankles and, guys always have a butt cut with hair parted down the middle? Like, you might picture some really weird Christian family. No, that's not what I mean. It does look like that some places, but that's not what I mean. Okay, let's just be honest, okay? But, like, God, show me what that looks like for people to be faithful and say, oh, yeah, the D word, divorce, it's not on the table for us. Like, we're going to figure this out together. This is a long-term style relationship. We're committed. We're committed to figuring things out together till death do us part. So show me examples of that. Loyalty and friendships. Let me see that example from people, God, that I'll see faithfulness. See single Christians who are just devoted to God, and you see that connection, that faithfulness. You're like, man, I see that. I see their faithfulness. And it's an example to me of what perseverance and faithfulness looks like. And just say, man, I'm going to do something to get around, to get near Christians who have followed God for many years. I think the best place for this is a Mo group at Momentum. There are other places for it, but a Mo group at Momentum is one of the reasons for that. These small group communities just meet throughout the week in homes, and they hang out, they eat meals, they laugh about just how, like, hashtag the Bengals are the new Browns. They laugh about stuff like that, and they just get excited that there's actually football in Cleveland again. And, you talk about that stuff, but you get a chance to be around people and be like, man, this person, he, they followed God for a long time. I'm going to guess behind the scenes, there have been some valleys. They've gone through some stuff. And the closer you're able to get to them, the more you might hear some of those stories about how they persevered. Like, let's just be honest. Someone at church did piss them off, but they got through the valley. Someone did say something offensive about their kid, and they said, this is a long-term style relationship. And sure, I'm beside a couple of butt heads, but I'm going to figure out how to have a long-term style relationship with imperfect people. And so you say, man, I got to get near some Christians who follow God and have for many years and see what I can learn from their faithfulness. Let me close with this. Back in 1995, there's a classic book written by Dr. Daniel Goleman called Emotional Intelligence. This often comes up a lot now. Just like, man, this person, they're emotionally intelligent. Like, they understand how to empathize and read a person and understand what's going on. Well, this is a classic, 1995. And basically, one of the things that he says is really interesting. He talks about how at that point, there was a bunch of psychological research and psychologists were writing about how for the previous 30 to 40 years before 1995, that people were saying, man, individualism is just continuing to rise more and more among us. And it's these attitudes of things like, I'm independent, I'm self-reliant, I can do this on my own. I don't need anybody's help. I'm independent. I pay my own bills. All you women independent, throw your hands up. So it's that, it's like, I don't need anybody but me. I can do this. I don't need you, and all that kind of stuff or whatever. But they're just like, man, but the problem with that is the more that we galvanize that mentality, and you need to have it in a couple areas, but the more that you galvanize that mentality, basically, he says this increase of individualism means a natural, decrease in things like religion, he says, in community, and in family. He said, and what happens then is that ultimately when you go through a setback, and setbacks can be big, they can be small, but when you go through a setback of some kind, you have a loss of resources to deal with that setback. And he says that one of the things is you deal with a setback or a failure, and when then suddenly you're encountered with the truth, like, oh man, I can't function 100% independent. I can't rely only on myself. I can't do this on my own. I do need help. And without the support of a church or a community or family, this momentary defeat, this setback, feels much bigger than it is. So think about right now, maybe the person that you've made your life, that you're dating, but maybe all your other friends are cut off and you have no community, and you just pull, anytime you date a guy, anytime you date a girl, you pour everything into that person, and everybody else is always like, yep, she's dating somebody, where'd she go again? That kind of thing. And so he's like, you just have, you have no resources when you experience that breakup then, or when you lose that job, or when you commit some kind of major failure that you're disappointed in yourself. And it is big, but it seems even more incredibly large than you would, like it should be. And so this momentary defeat feels bigger. And Goleman, a secular author who's a science journalist, says, but when you have a larger perspective, he says, when you have that larger perspective, like your church can remind you about things like God and the afterlife. So then all of a sudden, your breakup, like all of a sudden, that loss of a job, it comes in a perspective like, okay, with the help of my community around me who's realizing and also helping me understand this too shall pass, that now I'm starting to say, okay, I can get through today, and the next day I can get through today, and the next day I can get through today, until finally you're like, man, I got through that season. With the help of people around me, supporting me, reminding me, showing up with food, showing up with meals, texting me encouragement, they help me realize that this is just a temporary defeat. You need community. Psychologists, your creator tells you, and psychologists tells you, you need community to keep you from giving up. You need community to keep you from rage